Hey, do you have to deal with the double materiality assessment? Then this interview is going to be super interesting to you. I'm going to talk to Verneri Laakkonen, who's a lawyer that deals a lot with the double materiality process. And therefore, he has a very clear guideline on how to approach a DMA process and how to actually make it quite easy. Enjoy. First of all, thank you very much, Verneri, for taking the time and being at the AtlasZero podcast. For those of the listeners that don't know you yet, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What are you doing and how did you get here?
Sure. I'm Verneri Laakkonen. I'm from Finland. I used to be a corporate lawyer in my previous life, but now I'm doing sustainability consulting and software development. For the past year, I've been helping the largest companies in Finland with double materiality assessment and CSRD reporting in general.
Okay. And so how did this happen? Like you were a lawyer before and now you did something or you're doing or helping with sustainability. How did you make the switch? Why did you choose sustainability? Like how did that happen?
Yeah, I was in the previous law firm I worked at. I used to be in a group that developed solutions for sustainability reporting and sustainability requirements. But many times I noticed that customers asked that, can you actually help with this? Or do you have a software that can help with this or anything? And then the response was always no. And for me, there was a client that was asking for help and we said, can't. And inside me, I was like, I know some things about this already, so I probably could help you in some way. So at that point, I chose that maybe it's better to go by myself and give that advice that I do have at the point. And maybe it's a different view also from a lawyer's perspective. Like many times consultants have a different kind of view than lawyers do. And I think it can bring value for clients because this is regulation based after all.
Yeah. Okay. And right now you're also helping with the software or are you helping with consulting? Like how do you work with CSRD, DMA at the moment?
Yeah, we have a solution for a double materiality assessment, which is based on data and research, and also the first tool in Europe that automatically tags the CSR report with the SF tags that were released 2 months ago. And it also contains model documents. So what it basically allows the client to do is when they open it, they can start writing the pre-made document base, their content, and tags it. And then also a software called Double Materiality, where we fill in the data from the client and we create the result of the double materiality assessment. Contains all the questionnaires. And then, of course, it's the shell, but it needs content. So we also help with the content. Many times companies need a lot of training and they need to understand what the problems are and what they need to know. So we help with that side also. And there is a lot of like documentation that has to be created in both cases. And we help with that also. Sometimes there are limited resources within companies for sustainability. So
Mhm. Okay. And you said that you're already working with Finnish clients on the double materiality and things like that. Can you give us a little bit of insight into that? Like what stage are they at? What are you working mainly with?
yeah, we've completed 12 double materiality assessments so far, and we are currently working on 6 new ones. So we have done this quite many
Mhm.
times. So there's a good routine to it already. And basically what we use for the double materiality assessment is data from the company. So for example, purchases and sales, so cost and sales, which brings us a lot of insight into what the company is doing. And we can use that information together with studies on impacts and questionnaires to create the result of the double materiality assessment. And that's, I think, good approach is to take the demand set in the regulation and use the best available data to create the result for the client.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's quite an extensive experience already, considering that like this is fairly a new topic. So with the already previous 12 clients, can you tell us a little bit about what are the challenges that the companies have? What are the difficulties? Like what is your experience on that so far?
Yeah, I think the first thing to understand is what is required of the company. And there is 2 ways to think about it. There is first the goal and the requirements for the reporting. And in the legal sense, you are defining what disclosure topics do we have to disclose in the format given in CSRD. That is what double materiality defines. What disclosure requirements do we have to tell about the format defined by CSRD? And of course, the second thing is you actually do find out your sustainability impacts, risk, and opportunities. So there are kind of two different worlds. There is a world where you define the content and the extent of your reporting, but also the other side where you actually figure out what your sustainability impacts, risks, and opportunities are. And I think the big problem is people don't understand the method that is given in the regulation. And it's quite clear. There is 10 standards, and below the 10 standards, there is 92 topics. And you have to disclose what topics are material to you. And if the double materiality assessment is not done to the 92 topics, you cannot disclose which of the topics are material and which are not. So that's why it's important to focus the double materiality assessment given to the topics in the regulation. And it's not our review. There is a list of 92 topics that is said you must consider while doing the assessment. And a part of the final report is you have to tell which of them were material. So the target has to be the 92 topics and not like 10 high-level topics or something else, because you are going to require that information at some point in the assessment.
Okay. So basically, I take from that one of the key insights is to look at the 92 topics and then basically assess whether they are material or not. Can you tell us a little bit more about the 92 topics? Like, what exactly do they enclose? Where can one find them? What are those 92 topics?
Yeah, the 92 topics are at the end of ESRS 2, which is in the regulation. And there is a list that you can go through and look at them. And for example, climate change contains climate change adaptation, climate change mitigation, and energy as topics. And some of them might be material. Most of them are probably material to most companies. And then there is, for example, a standard for circular economy, where there is resource inflows, resource outflows, and waste, which are the 3 different topics below that. So it kind of goes to a more granular level. And then there is, of course, social standards, where you have own workforce, where there is working conditions and equal treatment and opportunities and basic workers' rights are some of the topics. Then there are topics for consumers and end users, for example, marketing. And then there is topics for governance, for example, corruption and corporate culture and things like this. So it's a very wide scope. It's not only environmental topics, but also social and governance topics, which are included in the list. And then it defines the method for doing the assessment also. So first you map the impacts, and then you assess the materiality of the impacts. And there is also a method that has to be used for this.
Okay. Can you maybe, or can we dive a little bit deeper into this? So I understood there are 92 topics and they need to be assessed. But how can they be accessed? You just mentioned a method. So how do you go along with actually making sure to say which of those topics is material or not?
Yeah, so there's 2 phases. First, you map the impacts, and then you assess the materiality of the impacts. And for mapping the impacts, we can make questionnaires, so we can ask stakeholders on their opinions. The first thing I'd like to point out is it's good to ask about relevant topics to the stakeholder. Like if you ask a customer about our impacts on global desertification, you are probably not going to get a very good answer from a client, because they don't know what the effect of a big group globally on the growing of deserts globally. But there is topics that are relevant to the customers. So for example, marketing, access to products and services, health and safety of products. So these are the questions that you should ask from customers. And the other part is when we are looking at environmental impacts, it's good to get some actual data, because that's what we need. And there we can look at the purchases or the costs and the sales of the company. And we can look what industries are the costs from and what are the impacts from those sectors. So for example, we can use SASB standards, which have industry-specific impacts per industry. And then we can look at how much of our cost goes to each industry and with this, we can map how much of the costs go to which industries and what are the sustainability impacts created by those. And the same thing with revenue. We can look what industries do we serve, where do our sales come from, and which industries they are, and what impacts are created by these. So this way, the mapping is based on data, not on feeling someone has. It's based on actual numbers. What are the costs? Where do they come from? And what are the impacts created by these costs? And what are the sales? And what are the impacts created by the sales? And this is also important for assurance purposes, because it might be difficult to prove to the person doing the assurance that, okay, we asked 3 people and they think it's this. I don't think many auditors are going to say, yeah, this is fine. Like you can define you can define your disclosure extent with this. No, they're going to need proof. So that's why we use data, costs, and studied information on create the results.
Okay. Very interesting. So I already talked to some companies that were trying to like do a double materiality assessment by themselves, and sometimes they use like Excel sheets and stuff like this. Can you maybe give us an insight into what you have seen in the market and maybe the difference to how you're doing this? Because I can imagine there's quite a big gap of like companies trying to somehow do it right and how it actually has to be done.
Yeah, we have created the software which contains all of the inputs required by the regulation. And what this helps to do is you only fulfill the stuff that is required from the company. And it also automatically creates the result, because there is a lot of things that are required to be assessed. So after you have mapped the impacts, you have to actually assess the materiality. And for this, there is quite extensive guidance. So you have to look at negative and positive impacts. And unlike in other places, they don't cancel each other out. You might have big negative impacts, but there is a great chance of positive impacts also. And they don't cancel each other out, but they just make the materiality column higher, because that's a material impact that you have. But also there is actual and potential impacts. So there are impacts that you have already seen happen, and then there are potentially. Then one portion is severity, where we look at the scale, scope, and remediability of impacts. And that's called severity. And these are like guidance on what to look for and how to define material impacts. And then there is also, for potential impacts, you look at the severity and the likelihood of impact. So you can create kind of a format for this that has to be used. You look at, is it a positive or is it a negative impact? Is it an actual or a potential impact? If it's actual, you look at the severity. If it's potential, you look at severity and likelihood. And the same thing for risks and opportunities. You look at, is it a risk or is it an opportunity? What is the potential size of the financial impact? And what is the likelihood of it being realized? And these are parameters to define materiality. And if you assign numerical values to the parameters, you can define a numerical way to find out the result. And there is an EFRAG workbook that gave some of the numerical advice on how this could be done. And that has been integrated to our system. It automatically gives the mathematical parameters, which allows, based on the mapping and based on the evaluations given, allows you to create the result of the double materiality assessment. But I think a key point is the word assessment. At this time, we don't have all of the data. It's the best assessment given by the company. And there are some companies with a lot of data and some companies with very little data. And we have to use what we can get. So we can make more questionnaires and we can look at the industries and get data that way. But that's not the materiality can change and it's not objective. And that's a good thing to remember. We have to make it as close to it as we can, but it's always an assessment of material.
Yeah. So right now you mentioned a lot of different things of like impacts to be positive or negative, to be potential or to be actual. Is there some way to like get an overview about this or to get a better feeling for this? So maybe listeners that are not that familiar with the topic, do you have any recommendation or tip what they could do to get a better overview about this?
Well, a good way is to draw a chart about what you have to do. And of course, we do have a chart, but it might be a bit difficult. Like that's what a lot of lawyers do. So, for example, the advice for double materiality is like 5 pages long in the standard. And what you look as a lawyer in this is you look at what are the requirements and then create a chart of how it would work as a process. And this chart is kind of useful. So what you look at is what are the processes needed to get the result. And so it's good to draw a chart of like positive and negative, then for actual and potential, and for actual severity, potential severity and likelihood, risk and opportunities, size of financial and likelihood. So you draw a chart. It explains what are the things that you have to look for. And the target of this chart is the 92 topics. And this is what you have to do. You have the 92 topics and you have to go through this process to get the result. Because you cannot just say that I feel like these are important ones. You have to be able to show what were the results, where did it come from. And this is the process used to do it, at least in the regulation. Of course, many people offer approaches which do not fulfill the requirements of the regulation. And I'm not so sure that those can be audited or used with assurance. So it's quite good that the companies understand what the requirements are and look for advisors who actually fulfill the requirements set by the regulation.
Okay. So if I understand correctly, you have the 92 topics you need to assess. You then take a map or chart, like you said, and you basically assess all of those topics. And the method you do to do that is with stakeholder engagement then, correct?
Stakeholder and the data side. So for example, there is impact materiality and there is financial materiality. In impact materiality, we look at what are the impacts created our own company and the value chain. And there it is quite useful to rely on data. So again, the costs and the sales. So we can actually see what the impacts of the industries we work in and we buy from, what are they in impact materiality. In financial materiality, we look how the topics affect us. And there is important to ask the people that affect us. For example, our workforce affects our business. So it's probably good to ask them about their working conditions and equal opportunities. Our business is affected by our customers, so it's good to ask what the customers think of that. Our business is also affected by our financiers and regulators and authorities. So we could ask about them what they think about this. So there is stakeholder engagement is very useful for financial materiality definitions, but impact materiality assessment it's good to do based on data because pre-existing industry-based data, because we might not have it from a customer or a worker. They cannot tell what your impact on like global pollution to seas are. They can't answer that question.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. I would like to pick your lawyer brain a little bit more about the whole DMA heart of things, because I feel like in at least the conversations that I have, I talk to a lot of controllers that don't really have a sustainability background, so they're not familiar with the regulations and with all of that. And they're basically trying to somehow figure themselves out and they're in front of a jungle. So do you have any recommendations from your perspective what companies should focus on, what is more important, what should they think about when doing a double materiality assessment?
I think the key is to understand the requirements. So to understand the target of the assessments, which is the 92 topics, there is a pre-existing list, and then understand the process that is used to conduct the assessment, mapping the impacts and assessing materiality. If you understand those two things, you can do a double materiality assessment for any company. And the rules are set in the regulation. So you have the target, which is the 92 topics, and you have the method where you map the impacts and assess the materiality. And again, it's good to like draw a chart of how the process goes for each of the topics. And that's enough. You have the correct target, which is the topics, and you have the correct process assessed. And this is all defined in ESRS 2. So you can read through it yourself and look at all the requirements. So it says, for example, for impact materiality, you look at severity, which is created by the scale, scope, and remediability of impacts. And you have to also, for potential impacts, you also have to assess likelihood. So these are written in the regulation. these are the requirements of the process. So it says you have to look at the scale, scope, remediability, and likelihood. You can take these and guide your process with them. And same thing for financial materiality. The regulation says you have to look at dependencies on resources, dependencies on business relations, possible financial impacts, and the likelihood of those being realized for risks and opportunities also. So there is guidance. Regulation is not your enemy. It's your tool. Like they don't leave you alone with this process. They tell you how you should do it, to what things you should do it, and how. And that's why I don't see it. And I think this is a great regulatory tool for once from the, because now they are not only saying you have to do everything and talk about everything. I think this is great. They tell you can limit it to the material topics. And this is the method you should use.
Okay. Super interesting view, because most companies that I talk to, they are completely overwhelmed. They don't know where to start. They just see like all the bureaucracy. And when I listen to you, it sounds more like it's very clear. There's a clear structure, and we start here and we go to there. And if we go to all the different steps, it actually makes sense. One more thing that I get asked by companies quite often is whether I have some cheat codes or some templates or some basically free material that can help them to get started. Do you have anything of those sorts, or can you give any recommendations what those companies can look for just to get something to get started and to get forward?
Yeah, of course, I can, for example, deliver the list of topics. You can look it for yourself. It's it's public information. And also the process is written in the regulation, but I'm also very happy to freely provide the process chart of how it goes, because I think the big help that advisors can give is in automation and the documentation. So all of this has to be documented. So that is what the software is for. So it has the correct targets already pre-selected, and it also has the process. Just only have to fill in the things. But of course, for anyone, I can freely provide the list of topics. It's public information. And also the same thing with the process chart, because again, you can draw it by looking at the requirements set in the regulation. You can draw the same chart yourself. So,
yeah. No, that sounds super helpful. If you can send me a link or something, and I can put it into the show notes, and I can like make it available to companies, because I think this would be very helpful. I have one more question. So for those companies that are listening and that have to do a double materiality assessment, what is the one thing that they should take away from this conversation to talk about tomorrow in the next DMA meeting? About what is the one recommendation that you would want them to remember from this podcast?
it's, well, as a lawyer, I would say fulfill the requirements set by the standards. But I don't know how helpful that answer is. Like, I think you also have to look at the other side, which is actually mapping your impacts and risks and opportunities and matching that to what the people want to know about, because this is the actual goal. We talked a lot about the method, but not the goal. The goal is to set what do we tell about in our final report. What are the material topics that people using the report want to know about? What are the topics that we want to talk about? And what do we want to tell about them? This is a important thing that I think many people miss. It's not only the negative and risks, but also what are the positive impacts that we want to talk about and tell. This is a source for finance. Like green finance offers like lower interest rates and better availability of financing. And if you can show that we do a lot of good, which many companies do, you can now do it in a way that can be compared. What are the things that we want to tell about in our report? What are the topics that we want to talk about? And it's a great way also to figure out impacts that we have not yet noticed. So there might be some topics that we have not considered ever before. And that's the usefulness of the list. Someone has given you a big, like a long list, and now you define a short list. And this is a tool for strategy also. You figure out what are your important sustainability risks and opportunities. And many times these are the same, which are great for your finances and your company in general. If you figure out what are the biggest risks related to sustainability in all subjects, environment, social, and governance, they are important insights for the people in the leadership also. And that's why I think it's important to have the leadership involved in the double materiality process also, to look at the risks and the opportunities that this can create for the companies doing the assessment.
Okay, super interesting. Yeah, I really like listening to you talking about the DMA because it sounds so structured and so clear. And usually when I look at a topic, there are so many different things that I'm not familiar with. So this is definitely a very nice insight. Those were the questions that I had so far. Is there anything that I might have forgotten to ask, or where you say this is important to mention, or do you think we covered the most important things?
I think we covered the most important things. So there is a set subject and a set method. Use the set subjects and use the set method, and you will be great. That is the message I got. And regulators,
it sounds really easy when you say it.
Yeah, the regulators have been kind enough to give us these parts. Of course, it's not like the method is clear, but of course the inputs you have to get from somewhere, and there is a lot, and it's not a perfect method. Like the 92 topics don't fit all companies, and also the regulation says that if there is a topic that is not in the list but is material to you, you have to report it. So that's one good thing to remember. If there is a topic that's really material for your company, but it's not in the list, you should include it, and you must include it. And the other part is, of course, companies are different and there are different fields. And for example, for banks, it's quite a difficult thing because you have financing in all of the sectors. So do you have to report on all of the sectors or only some of the sectors? And these are the questions, these are the difficult questions. I think the problem, at least in my experience, the ones we have done is not the method or the target, but it's the differences, circumstances per company. And I think that's where experience comes in. So after you work with many companies, for example, banks or insurance, you know how to approach the subject in that context also. So.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting ideas. Thank you very much for sharing your experience and for taking the time to being on the podcast. And I hope I talk to you very soon.
Yeah, thanks very much. Here for you soon.